Turning into Gods, the trailer opens with a quote from E.O. Wilson, the famous sociobiologist, and he says, "Homo sapiens, the first truly free species, is about to decommission natural selection, the force that made us." Are we as a species, where are we? Are we approaching that? Are we past that? Is it coming soon?
Well, Freeman Dyson, the physicist, has a wonderful quote. He says, in the near future, a new generation of artists are going to be writing genomes with the fluency that Blake and Byron wrote verses, or with the fluency that Shakespeare would write sonnets. So this idea that the new canvas for the artist is now life itself, what kind of new forms of human creativity and human flourishing are going to come out of that? You know, when you consider the fact that sort of every technology unleashes a new form of human expression that didn't exist before, which is sort of the way that I see it. You know, Kevin Kelly has talked about how, you know, the technology of the instrument, the piano, or the technology of musical annotation allowed Mozart and Beethoven, you know, to emerge through that, right? And so now that the new sort of palette for aesthetic design, for, you know, intelligent design, is the technology of life itself. I just think that that is really exciting, and I think it means that we've crossed a critical threshold in the sense that, like, evolution has become self-aware. It has woken up. You know, when Carl Sagan says we will wait for the cosmos to know itself, I think that he is referring to the moment where we're actually going to start sort of tinkering with things and advancing. You know, evolution has evolved its own evolvability with the arrival of us.
So we're there.
I think we're there. I mean, when you consider the fact that we've created more technological change in 100 years, or we have accrued more change, period, than evolution did in 1 billion years. That exponential increase points to the fact that, like, we may, you know, Craig Venter might have just created synthetic life a short time ago, but progress happens at an exponential rate. We're going to become masters at this technology a lot quicker than people might intuitively believe. I mean, Kurzweil has the famous example about the supercomputer in the 1960s in Stanford that was $60 million and half a building in size, right? And he says the computer in your smartphone, right? Your smartphone today is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful. It's a 1 billion-fold increase in price and performance. That hasn't stopped. That exponential progress is going to continue. And everything that is the information technology is swallowing up these, you know, it's spilling over from the electronic into the real, right? Because biotechnology is now, you know, has turned biology into an information technology, so it will be subject to that same accelerating progress. And then with nanotechnology, we're talking about changing and infusing intelligence into matter, designing the constructs of reality at the sort of nano scale are now going to be also subject for our aesthetic design. So what are we talking about? Rendering our imagination into existence in real time. We're talking like Inception dreamscapes, but in the real world.
What do you say to people who get kind of scared or freaked out by this stuff, this transhumanism, we're all gonna merge with the machines? That freaks some people out. What do you say to those people?
No, it's interesting. People are always scared of new technology, and I think sometimes people who, you know, we're stuck in the reality tunnel of the present. You know, usually it's good when macro thinkers encourage us to get an aerial view of things so we can see the big picture. But, you know, when the technology of writing, like, was first invented, like, Socrates thought that this was heresy because it would atrophy people's memories, because now they could, like, download their consciousness and write things down and they wouldn't have to recall things. So people have always sort of been scared of new technologies, but in the end we assimilate them and they improve the quality of our lives. You know, so many prominent scientists used to say man would never achieve flight, you know, and then of course we have airplanes now that don't just fly, but allow us to communicate telepathically with the Earth. I mean, Wi-Fi on a Virgin America flight means that not only can we fly, but we can be telepathic while we're in flight. Kurzweil, the wonderful futurist, talks about how we are the species that transcends its boundaries. Our function is to sort of expand our sphere of possibility. We've done it from the moment that we picked up a stick and used it to sort of reach a fruit that was on a really high tree. We've used technology, we've used tools to extend our reach, but also to extend who and what we are, metaphorically and literally. You know, the naked ape, you know, we may be stumbling primates, stumbling flawed primates, but when we work together, we're primates that can fly.
Do you think there's anything that can stop it? I mean, economist Tyler Cowen talks about the Great Stagnation, which is basically innovation is reaching kind of a plateau. It's being stopped by the regulatory state and by perverse incentives being set up by governments. Do you think that this progress can be stopped?
I don't think it can be stopped. I think, you know, things can be slowed down, but I think it's like a flowing body of water. It'll kind of go around, you kind of drive around the dummies. And I also believe that, the sort of decentralized nature of information technology now with the internet makes it a lot harder to sort of pull the cord on that kind of innovation. I mean, when Stephen Johnson talks about the rise of the coffee shop and how it led to simultaneously to the rise of so much innovation, is because you put all these smart minds together in a sort of a small, in terms of density, it's going to lead to that kind of emergent self-organization. Just like when atoms come together and they sort of turn into, they have emergent properties. But I think what the internet does is it connects all of our minds together, and we sort of transcend the limitations of time and distance. So now we move into a post-geographical world where we can come together and self-organize and have unexpected relevance and serendipity based on shared passions, not bounded by the skin bag or the meat space, right? Amber Case, the cyborg anthropologist, says every time we make a telephone call, we're actually creating a techno-social wormhole. It's technologically mediated telepathy, okay? We are telepathic creatures. And, Andy Clark, who wrote Natural Born Cyborgs, said that we should stop thinking of the mental apparatus as bound by the skin bag, because the reality is the mental apparatus is a dance between brains, their environments, and their technologies and their tools. The extended mind thesis talks about the fact that our iPhone is not just like something that we use as a tool, but it's actually an outsourcing our cognition, storing parts of our memory. Just like we have a neocortex or a frontal lobe, the iPhone is part of the extended man. The Vitruvian man, as Leonardo drew him, today would have an iPhone in his hand, and the iPhone would have a little diagram that says this gives us telepathy, just like the frontal lobe or the neocortex give us complex thought. It's a part of who and what we are.
As someone who's so interested in escaping your skin bag, it's not surprising you've made so much of your career on the internet. You've been a host on Current TV. Right. You make your own internet documentaries. Yeah. What is the role of the democratization of information that has happened with the internet? In one sense, it's easier to get your stuff out there. In another sense, it's such a cacophony, so many voices.
Well, I think that, it's interesting to draw the analogy between psychedelics and computers, but Timothy Leary used to say you take psychedelics to get rid of your mental filters, to get rid of your preconceptions, to sort of expand your sphere of possibility, to unbound, free your mind, right? And when he saw the potential of computers and the internet, he came out in the 90s as a techno-optimist who said, the computers are the LSD of the 90s, not to mention the fact that a lot of the engineers who invented the personal computer and the microprocessor, who reconceived of computers, of these big von Neumann centralized things into these tools that could free individual minds and could be extension of individual minds, they were all tripping when they had those realizations and those aha moments to begin with. What the Dormouse says, a wonderful book that talks about this. But I think that that's what the computer does today to each and every one of us. I mean, this decentralized information technology extends the reach of each and every one of us and extends our ability to sort of create connections with one another. So we all become like nodes in this macro brain, and I think that the emergent properties of self-organization that we find at other scales of reality will start to occur on this scale of reality. And I think that it's a transitionary time, and we're competing with a lot of noise on the internet, and to get heard is very difficult, but at the same time, you can sort of surf that wave of bliss so much farther. You don't have to worry about gravity or temperature or distance. It's just kind of your mind can soar through the cosmos in a way, just like with the psychedelics. Yeah,
it's interesting you mentioned psychedelics, because you are someone who, there's a lot of people now calling for legalization, at least of marijuana. There's a growing swell, thankfully. But you actually go further and advocate the use of psychedelics.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it should be done in a controlled setting 100%. And I will actually tell you that I haven't done strong psychedelics yet. I haven't arrived to the point where I felt like I'm ready to take that Joseph Campbell hero's journey. Right, but marijuana I do think is extremely beneficial as an entry point into expanding your sphere of creativity. There was an interesting article in a psychiatry journal that Jonah Lehrer wrote about that looked at divergent thinking and creativity, and it was talking about the fact that if creativity were to be measured by semantic priming, which is the association that you might make between one word or concept and related concepts. So I might tell you, bird, and then you think of aviation, and then you think of flying, right? Those are the semantic priming, like when you throw a pebble in the water and it causes ripple associations, right? So he says they did a study where they gave people marijuana to see if it would induce a state of semantic priming, which means that it would expand the free associative capacity of individuals and therefore increase creativity, increase your ability to draw novel connections between seemingly more disparate things. And it turns out that yes, marijuana in some individuals does induce the hyper-priming.
So the stoners were right all along.
Well, 100%. I mean, there's the fact that the guys that discovered the DNA molecule were said to have tripped on acid is not a coincidence either. But absolutely, I think marijuana is a teacher plant. I think it's one of the most therapeutically active substances known to man. I mean, since high school, I've been writing for a high school newspaper about the legalization of marijuana. I'm convinced that it needs to be completely legalized, completely available to anything. Not to mention, Abraham Lincoln, wasn't he the one who says prohibition goes beyond the bounds of reason because it attempts to make a crime out of things that are not crime by legislating a man's appetite? How dare we go into somebody's bedroom and tell them they can't do that in bed? How dare we tell somebody they can't smoke a joint?
In a sense, this historical crisis or this singularity that we're approaching is like a transition from a low-dimensional world, say a world of 2 or 3 dimensions, to a world of 4, 5, or 6 dimensions. This is what I believe actually happens to a human brain-mind system under the influence of psychedelics. So in a way, the best practice for the approaching singularity is the repeated dissolving and reconstituting of one's personality through the use of psychedelic substances. Well, that is the most tricky question. Are we going to retain the monkey meat? Are we going to hang on to the body and through the body have a connection to the rest of animal nature? Or are we going to become disembodied streams of electrons moving in virtual realities that are contained entirely in circuitry? I think this will probably go both ways. There will be fundamentalists who want nothing to do with technological transformation, and there will be utopians who won't be able to get enough of it. This is probably the moral frontier where we each personally must make a stand. How much of the new technology and its reality redefining qualities do we want to take into our own lives?
And Turning into Gods, the trailer opens with a quote from E.O. Wilson, the famous sociobiologist, and he says, Homo sapiens, the first truly free species, is about to decommission natural selection, the force that made us. Are we as a species, where are we?
Human flourishing are going to come out of that. You know, when you consider the fact that sort of every technology unleashes a new form of human expression that didn't exist before, which is sort of the way that I see it. You know, Kevin Kelly has talked about how, you know, the technology of the instrument, the piano, or the technology of musical annotation allowed Mozart and Beethoven, you know, to emerge through that, right?
Approaching that? Are we past that? Is it coming soon?
Well, Freeman Dyson, the physicist, has a wonderful quote. He says, in the near future, a new generation of artists are going to be writing genomes with the fluency that Blake and Byron wrote verses, or with the fluency that Shakespeare would write sonnets. So this idea that the new canvas for the artist is now life itself, what kind of new forms of human creativity?